Hello and welcome to the Kent History Channel. My name is George Chittenden. I'm a national award-winning tour guide, novelist and historian. Living in Kent, we are very privileged to have such rich and diverse history. And it's my opinion that this area has more history than anywhere on earth. So over the next few months, I'll be taking you all on a journey through time. In this week's 10-minute episode, we'll be exploring the castles on the Downs and why this country faced a serious threat of invasion in the year 1539. I could choose many different points of history to begin this story. I'm going to start in the year 1501, when a young prince and heir to the throne of England married a Spanish princess, Catherine of Aragon, to strengthen bonds between two great nations. The young prince was Prince Arthur, oldest son of Henry VII. Tragically though, fate decided to lead our country down a different path, and after only 5 months of marriage, Prince Arthur, the future King of England, died suddenly. It was likely the cause was tuberculosis, but either way it thrust his younger brother Henry onto the throne of England and changed history and this country forever. Desperate to maintain a strong alliance with Spain, the marriage between Prince Arthur and Catherine was annulled, and a young Henry not only found his brother's crown on his head, but his dead brother's wife in his bed. When we think of Henry VIII, we tend to think of a savage. It's mainly because we remember him for killing his wives, but in actual fact he was incredibly well educated. He took to the throne of England in the year 1509, and for several decades he was incredibly successful, even being crowned Defender of the Faith by the Pope in 1530. But one thing history teaches us is that nothing lasts forever. Like all kings, Henry VIII needed a male heir, which was something Catherine had failed to provide him with. Over the course of Henry's life, he'd produced many male heirs through his various wives. However, sadly, very few of them survived infancy. Interestingly, Henry VIII did father a child to a mistress. The child was illegitimate and as a result wasn't heir to the throne of England. However, Henry acknowledged that child as his own and even bestowed the title of Duke on him. In 1533, Henry VIII finally divorced Catherine and married Anne Boleyn, hoping that Anne Boleyn would provide him with the son he so desired. This not only angered the Roman Catholic Church, but is also a huge insult to the Emperor of Spain, Charles V, who was Catherine of Aragon's nephew. Catholic Europe was angry with Henry's actions, and in the year 1536, Henry poured fuel on the fire by beginning to suppress the English monasteries, appropriating their wealth to the crown. Henry's confidence was mainly down to the fact that the Catholic powers of France and Spain were at war with each other. But in the year 1538, Francis I of France and Charles V of Spain would make peace with each other. This was terrible news for Henry. It provided all the justification needed for Catholic Europe to rid England of its heretical king and restore the Catholic faith on these shores once more. Suddenly, Henry VIII faced a serious threat of invasion. He was aware that his navy was small and they would be unable to defeat an invasion fleet at sea. So he sent his men down to the southern coast to inspect sites where possible fortifications could be built, overlooking harbours, dockyards, likely landing places, and of course anchorages. Sat just off the coast of Deal are the notorious Goodwin Sands. These large sandbanks over the years have cost the lives of thousands of sailors and hundreds of ships. They create a stretch of sheltered water known as the Downs Anchorage, offering protection from the elements in bad weather. The Downs Anchorage has deep water close to the shore, making it easy for ships to land soldiers on the shore, and is large enough to accommodate up to 1,500 ships at anchor. This makes this stretch of coastline one of the most vulnerable stretches of coastline anywhere on the south coast, and a perfect place to land an invasion fleet. Of course, by the late 1530s, Canterbury was a walled city, so Henry VIII and his advisors were well aware that if an invasion fleet managed to land soldiers on the shoreline here, they would march the soldiers to Canterbury within a day and occupy the walled city. So a decision was made to completely fortify this stretch of coastline in between Sandwich Bay to the north and Kingsdown Cliff to the south, and Henry VIII wasted no time. With such a huge stretch of coastline to protect, it was obvious that one fort wouldn't suffice. So a decision was made to build 7 individual forts along this 2.5 mile stretch of coastline. 3 would be masonry castles, with 4 earth bulwarks in between. The entire stretch would all be linked by ramparts and ditches. Construction started at the beginning of April 1539, and by May 1400 men were employed in the task. They began by creating the earth bulwarks and digging out the trenches that would link all 7 forts. Here in this image we can see the bulwarks being created, and in the distance we can see the construction beginning of Sandown Castle. The earth bulwarks all had names, and running from Sandown towards Warmer, they were known as the Little Turf Bulwark, the Great Turf Bulwark, the Warmer Bulwark, and the Great White Bulwark. The 3 masonry castles would be of a completely new design. Only a few years earlier, in 1527, a German engineer named Dürer published a book suggesting that round walls deflected cannon fire more effectively than straight walls. Henry VIII's chief engineer, a man named Stefan von Haschenberg, favoured Dürer's theories, and he lived in Deal whilst the construction of the castles was overseen. The castle at Deal sat in the very middle of this huge fortification. It was larger than the other 2 masonry castles, and it was different in design. It was referred to as the Great Castle, comprising of a circular central tower to serve as a gun platform, surrounded by 6 smaller semicircular bastions, which all sat on top of a further 6 large hollow bastions. In total, there was space for 66 guns, arranged over 4 tiers, firing in every possible direction. The castle had a dry moat surrounded by a curtain wall. The moat was protected by 53 guns firing through gun loops at ground level. The dry moat was a very effective killing zone, and anyone that managed to get in wasn't getting out alive. Castles at Sandown and Warmer were the same in design and less complex than the castle at Deal. They still had a central tower, but they only had 1 layer of bastions comprising of 4. Both castles had 39 positions for large guns and 31 for smaller weapons protecting the dry moats. The entire fortification overlooking the Downs anchorage was complete by autumn 1540 and looked like this. It cost £27,092 at the time to construct, which in today's money is approximately £16,240,000. I imagine you would have expected a much higher figure, but of course Henry's men had an abundance of building materials from the countless monasteries and abbeys that were being pulled down, and an army to use as labourers, which kept costs down as well. Thankfully, the invasion threat would pass very quickly within Henry VIII's reign. However, many years later, when his daughter Elizabeth I would sit on the throne of England, that invasion threat would return. In the year 1588, when the Spanish mounted an invasion with their armada. Of course, when the Spanish armada passed through the English Channel, These castles on the coast would have been very heavily garrisoned. Thankfully, the Armada met a storm in the North Sea, and as a result, I'm delivering this episode in English rather than Spanish. However, on the flip side, if the Spanish Armada had successfully invaded this country, I imagine England would have had a much better football team. The castles on the Downs quickly became redundant as technology progressed. They were used during the English Civil War in the 17th century when they lay at siege, and they were also used during the Napoleonic Wars. However, they were never used for their intended purpose. Sadly, very little remains of Sandown Castle. In 1785, the sea entered the dry moat for the first time, and within a few years it quickly began to destabilise the building. As the sea encroached the castle further, as the shoreline progressed, the tough decision was finally made in the 1860s to begin pulling it down. Deal Castle remains virtually unchanged since its original construction. Warmer Castle became the official residence of the Lord Warden of the Cinque Ports. Both castles are open to the public and well worth a visit. I hope you've all enjoyed this week's episode. Feel free to subscribe to us on YouTube and follow us on Facebook. I'll see you all next week.